She has my room. Why shouldn't she have my TV? I'd put her in my will, but she already has everything I own.
From violent on-set head collisions requiring stitches to Tom Cruise warning the star against doing television, the beloved 80s sitcom Perfect Strangers hid some truly bizarre secrets behind Balki's innocent smile and the dance of joy. The show that launched Steve Urkel's career had casting chaos involving a fired comedian, a fictional national anthem sung by Whitney Houston, and a Hollywood conspiracy theory that cost an actor a job decades later. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Perfect Strangers. Fact 1. Comedian Louis Anderson was the original Larry.
And I have decided to leave, and there is nothing you can do to make me stay.
When Perfect Strangers was being developed in 1985, the producers had a very different vision for who would play Balki's American cousin. Before Mark Lynn-Baker ever stepped onto the set, comedian Louis Anderson was cast in the role for the show's unaired pilot episode. At the time, Anderson was a rising stand-up comedian who would later become famous for hosting Family Feud and creating the animated series Life with Louie. But back then, he was just getting his start in television. The producers thought his comedic talents would be a good match for Bronson Pinchot's over-the-top foreign character, and they filmed an entire pilot with Anderson playing a character named Cousin Louie instead of Larry. However, when the producers and network executives watched the finished pilot, something felt off. The chemistry between Anderson and Pinchot just wasn't clicking the way they had hoped. The dynamic between the two actors didn't have the spark that a successful buddy comedy needs to work, and everyone involved agreed that they needed to make a change. Anderson was let go from the project, and the producers began the search for a new actor to fill the role. They auditioned several other actors before finally discovering Mark Lynn-Baker, who had recently appeared in a guest spot on the hit show Moonlighting. When Lynn-Baker read opposite Pinchot, the producers immediately recognized the natural chemistry between them. What's interesting is that both Lynn-Baker and Pinchot were graduates of Yale University, which may have contributed to their instant rapport. The character's name was also changed from Lou to Larry, and the rest became television history. Fact 2. Tom Cruise advised Bronson Pinchot to avoid television.
You know, on Meepos, we have a way of showing an apology is real.
Tell me, I'll do it.
Well, first you pluck a chicken.
Balki.
Before Bronson Pinchot became a household name as Balki on Perfect Strangers, he had a small role in the 1983 film Risky Business alongside Tom Cruise. During the filming of that movie, Cruise noticed that Pinchot was struggling financially as a young actor trying to make it in Hollywood. In what seemed like a generous gesture, Cruise offered to lend Pinchot money to help him get by during those difficult early days in his career. However, Cruise also gave Pinchot some career advice that could have changed television history. According to Pinchot's account in interviews, Cruise strongly warned him against ever taking work in television, telling him, "Whatever you do, don't do it." This advice reflected the common belief in Hollywood at that time that television work was somehow beneath film actors and could damage a movie career. Pinchot later explained that while he appreciated Cruise's offer of financial help, he wasn't in a position to be picky about work opportunities the way someone like Tom Cruise could afford to be. As Pinchot put it, he wasn't Tom Cruise, so he couldn't afford to turn down good opportunities just because they were on television instead of in movies. When the chance came to star in Perfect Strangers, just a few years later in 1986, Pinchot ignored Cruise's warning and accepted the role. That decision turned out to be one of the best of his career, as Perfect Strangers ran for 8 successful seasons and made Pinchot a beloved television star. If he had followed Tom Cruise's advice and avoided television work entirely, millions of viewers would never have experienced Balki's Dance of Joy or his unforgettable catchphrase, "Don't be ridiculous." Fact 3. A violent scene sent both stars to the hospital.
I can't let you take advantage of her. I don't think it's right just because she has a public figure.
Perfect Strangers was known for its physical comedy and energetic performances, but during one 1988 taping, things went dangerously wrong when the show's trademark slapstick turned into a real medical emergency. The incident occurred while filming a scene where Larry was supposed to be teaching Balki how to be more assertive, which required some physical action between the two actors. Bronson Pinchot grabbed his co-star Mark Lynn Baker and began shaking him with such force and intensity that their heads accidentally collided with a sickening impact. Both men immediately went down, and it quickly became clear that this wasn't just a minor bump that they could shake off and continue filming. The collision resulted in serious injuries for both actors that required immediate medical attention. Pinchot ended up damaging one of his teeth on Lynn Baker's forehead during the impact, and the injury was severe enough that he needed to undergo a root canal procedure to repair the damage. Lynn Baker's forehead was cut open from the force of Pinchot's tooth hitting it, and he required stitches to close the wound properly. This story was documented in a network-authorized newsletter that circulated among fans of the series before the internet existed, written by author Paula Wilshie, who described the incident as resulting in a bloody mess on set. The fact that both actors were willing to commit so fully to the physical comedy of their roles shows their dedication to making the show work, even though this particular scene ended up being far more physical than anyone had intended. The incident stands as a reminder of how dangerous even comedic scenes can become when actors are performing their own stunts and physical gags. Fact 4. Balki was named after a dog.
I'm going to my citizenship class.
Balki, you can't do this to me.
Who do you think you're talking to? Somebody nice?
One of the most beloved character names in 80s television history came from an unlikely source, a family pet. When Bronson Pinchot was working with the producers to develop his character for Perfect Strangers, they needed to come up with the perfect name for the lovable cousin from the Mediterranean island of Mypos. The character's name needed to sound foreign and memorable, but also friendly and approachable to American audiences. During these creative discussions, Pinchot reached back into his childhood memories and recalled a story about his sister's dog that his family had considered naming years earlier. According to Pinchot's account in a 1986 interview with TV Guide, when his family was deciding what to name his sister's new dog, they had seriously considered calling the animal Balcony. The name didn't end up being the dog's official name, but the family had created a nickname from it anyway, shortening Balcony to Balsi. That nickname had stuck in Pinchot's memory all those years, and when he was searching for the right name for his Perfect Strangers character, the sound of Balsi came back to him. He suggested a variation of that childhood dog nickname, and that's how Balki Bartokomous got his first name. It's a strange twist of fate that one of television's most iconic characters ended up being named after a pet that never actually had that name in the first place. The fact that the name came from such a personal and random place in Pinchot's memory makes it even more charming, especially considering how perfectly it fit the innocent and endearing character that Balki became over the show's 8-season run. Fact 5. Whitney Houston's song was Mypos' national anthem. The writers of Perfect Strangers created an entire fictional world for Balki's homeland of Mypos, complete with its own bizarre customs, traditions, and even a national anthem. In a February 1988 interview with the San Gabriel Valley Tribune, Bronson Pinchot revealed one of the show's most amusing behind-the-scenes jokes that most viewers never got to see. According to Pinchot, the writers had decided that the national anthem of the fictional Mediterranean island of Mypos was actually Whitney Houston's hit song, How Will I Know?, which had been a chart-topping success just a couple of years earlier in 1986. This choice was deliberately absurd and humorous, and Pinchot explained the reasoning behind it in his interview by pointing out that they could never be that playful or silly if they were dealing with a real country, because people from an actual nation would be horrified by the suggestion that a pop song was their national anthem. The beauty of creating a completely fictional country was that the writers had total freedom to invent whatever ridiculous details they wanted without worrying about offending anyone or being culturally insensitive. Pinchot mentioned in the interview that Balki had actually sung the My Post's national anthem during filming at some point, but unfortunately that particular moment ended, up being cut from the episode for time constraints before it ever made it to air. It's a shame that audiences never got to see Balki performing Whitney Houston's song as a patriotic tribute to his homeland, because it would have been a perfect example of the show's willingness to embrace absurdity and find humor in the clash between American pop culture and Balki's fictional Mediterranean traditions. Fact 6. Pinchot replaced Fisher Stevens, then got replaced.
You did it again. You've got to stand up for yourself. Sit down.
Back. In 1986, Bronson Pinchot found himself caught in the middle of an unusual casting situation involving the science fiction comedy film Short Circuit. The movie tells the story of a military robot that gains consciousness after being struck by lightning, and one of the key roles was Ben Jabatuya, a scientist who helps program the robots. Actor Fisher Stevens had originally been hired to play this character, but the filmmakers decided to fire him and make changes to how the character would be portrayed. When Stevens was let go from the production, the studio brought in Bronson Pinchot as his replacement, and Pinchot began preparing to take on the role in the film. However, this casting situation was about to get even more complicated. Around the same time that Pinchot was hired for Short Circuit, the producers of Perfect Strangers were moving forward with their new television series, and they wanted Pinchot to star as Balki. When it became clear that Perfect Strangers was going to begin production and would require Pinchot's full commitment, he had to make a choice between the film and the television show. Pinchot decided to leave Short Circuit in order to begin work on Perfect Strangers, which meant the filmmakers suddenly needed to find someone to fill the role once again. In a twist that brought things full circle, the studio decided to rehire Fisher Stevens for the part after all, making him the actor who appears in the final version of Short Circuit. This game of casting musical chairs ultimately worked out well for everyone involved, as Stevens became known for his performance in Short Circuit, while Pinchot went on to achieve television stardom as Balki. Fact 7. The show was originally titled The Greenhorn. When producers Thomas Miller, Robert Boyette, and Dale McRaven first pitched their concept for a sitcom about a foreign immigrant adjusting to American life, the show had a completely different title than the one that eventually became famous. The working title that the producers used when they initially approached ABC with the project was The Greenhorn, which is an old-fashioned term for someone who is inexperienced or new to a particular situation. The word greenhorn perfectly described what the show was going to be about, since the main character would be a naive foreigner trying to navigate the complexities of American culture for the first time. The producers had developed this concept after watching international athletes experience American life during the 1984 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles, and they thought exploring that kind of culture shock would make for great comedy. When they pitched the show to ABC under the title The Greenhorn, the network executives loved the premise and agreed to move forward with the project, especially after the producers told them they wanted Bronson Pinchot to star in it. Pinchot had recently gotten attention for his memorable performance in the film Beverly Hills Cop, where he played a quirky art gallery employee with an unusual accent, and the network was eager to work with him. However, at some point during the development process, the title was changed from The Greenhorn to Perfect Strangers, which ended up being a much better fit for the show's actual content. The new title worked on multiple levels, since it referred both to the fact that Larry and Balki were distant cousins who barely knew each other, and to the idea that they were two very different people learning to live together despite being complete opposites. Fact 8. Episodes aired just 1 week after rehearsal.
Cousin, if you don't want Gina here, why you didn't say so?
It's a little inconvenient, but I'll get used to it. I'm glad we can help out. Let's hit the sack.
The production schedule for the first season of Perfect Strangers was absolutely frantic, even by television standards, because of unusual timing circumstances that put enormous pressure on everyone involved. ABC executives loved the show's premise and wanted to get it on the air as quickly as possible, but they didn't want to wait until the fall, when new shows typically premiered. Instead, they decided to use Perfect Strangers as a mid-season replacement in the spring of 1986, which meant the producers had to create episodes much faster than they normally would have. To make matters even more challenging, ABC President Brandon Stoddard offered the producers a prime time slot between two of the network's biggest hits, Who's the Boss and Moonlighting. But this coveted placement came with very little advance notice. The result was a production timeline that would be almost impossible to imagine today. The entire first season consisted of only 6 episodes. And these episodes were taped in record-breaking time to meet the network's demanding schedule. In at least one case, an episode went from its very first rehearsal to actually airing on television in just 1 week, giving the cast and crew almost no time to refine their performances or fix any problems that came up during filming. This breakneck pace meant that Mark Lynn Baker and Bronson Pinchot had to develop their characters and build their on-screen chemistry while essentially learning their lines and blocking at the last possible minute. Despite these incredibly rushed conditions, the show was an immediate hit with audiences, and 5 out of the 6 first-season episodes landed in the weekly Nielsen Top 10 highest-rated programs, proving that the gamble on the accelerated production schedule had paid off.
And she said to me, would you take this to my house? And I said, of course, because it's only 93 blocks.
Fact 9. The Leftovers reference cost Lynn Baker a job. Years after Perfect Strangers ended, Lynn Baker found himself in an extremely bizarre situation where a throwaway joke on another television show ended up costing him an acting opportunity. The HBO drama series The Leftovers, which premiered in 2014, was set in a world where 2% of the global population had suddenly and mysteriously disappeared in an event called The Sudden Departure. To illustrate the randomness of who vanished and who remained, the writers included various references to real people and pop culture figures who had disappeared in their fictional universe. One of these references was a casual line establishing that the entire cast of Perfect Strangers had departed during the event, which seemed like just a funny throwaway detail to show how arbitrary the disappearances were. However, this joke created an unexpected problem when Mark Lynn Baker went to audition for a role on The Leftovers during the show's first season. He was reading for the part of an administrator who would work in an office and interact with one of the main characters. According to Lynn Baker's own account of what happened, after he auditioned for the role, the producers informed him that they couldn't cast him because it would be too confusing for viewers. The writers had already established within the show's universe that the real Mark Lynn Baker existed and had departed along with his Perfect Strangers castmates, so having him appear as a different character would contradict their own continuity. Ironically, this rejection eventually freed Lynn Baker up to later appear on The Leftovers as a fictional version of himself in a much more prominent storyline during the show's second and third seasons, turning the initial joke into a meaningful part of the series. Fact 10. Music licensing killed the DVD.
You're willing to give up your bedroom to a woman I hardly know?
Release's fans of Perfect Strangers, who wanted to own the complete series on DVD, were left disappointed and frustrated by a problem that had nothing to do with poor sales or lack of interest. In February 2008, Warner Home Video released the first 2 seasons of Perfect Strangers on DVD. In multiple regions around the world, and fans were thrilled to finally have the show available in a physical format they could keep forever. However, those initial releases turned out to be the only seasons that would ever make it to DVD, and the remaining 6 seasons of the show have never been officially released in that format. The reason for this has nothing to do with the show's popularity or profitability, but rather comes down to the complicated and expensive world of music licensing rights. According to reports from industry websites that track television DVD releases, the main obstacle preventing further Perfect Strangers releases was the extremely high cost of securing music licensing for the episodes. What makes this situation particularly frustrating is that the show didn't even use the original recordings of popular songs in most cases. Instead, whenever the script called for Balki or Larry to sing a well-known song, the actors would perform it themselves in an a cappella style without any backing music or instrumentation. Despite the fact that these were just Mark Lynn Baker and Bronson Pinchot singing the songs in their own voices rather than using the actual recordings by the original artists, the studio would still need to pay licensing fees to the songwriters and music publishers who owned the rights to those compositions. These costs apparently became too high for Warner to justify releasing the rest of the series, leaving fans with an incomplete collection. Fact 11. Lucille Ball was a superfan.
Am I looking up Larry Appleton?
Larry Appleton, that's me.
For Bronson Pinchot and Mark Lynn Baker, receiving praise from one of the most legendary figures in television comedy history was an incredibly meaningful moment in their careers. Both actors had always viewed Perfect Strangers as a spiritual successor to classic physical comedy shows like I Love Lucy and The Honeymooners, focusing on character-driven humor and slapstick rather than the topical, issue-oriented sitcoms that dominated television in the 1980s. When the show returned for its second season in August of 1986, after the success of the initial 6-episode run that spring, Lucille Ball herself spoke to the press about the new show and gave both stars her enthusiastic endorsement. Ball told reporters that she thought Pinchot and Lynn Baker were both just great, and she made a point of saying that she loved those two guys, which was high praise coming from someone who had defined television comedy for decades. For Pinchot in particular, hearing this kind of compliment from Lucille Ball was an almost overwhelming honor, and he later tried to put the experience into perspective by comparing it to being a watercolor artist and having the famous painter Renoir look at your work and say that it was interesting and showed good technique. The fact that Ball recognized what they were trying to do with the show and appreciated their approach to comedy meant everything to both actors, since they were deliberately trying to create the kind of timeless physical comedy that Ball herself had perfected on I Love Lucy. Her public support helped validate their creative vision and gave them confidence that they were on the right track with their performances. Fact 12. Whoa. Both stars were Yale graduates.
There is not sufficient light in this room for me to fill your tooth.
One of the most surprising facts about Perfect Strangers is that both of its lead actors shared an impressive educational background that stood in stark contrast to the characters they played on screen. Mark Lynn Baker and Bronson Pinchot were both graduates of Yale University, one of the most prestigious Ivy League institutions in the United States, and both had excelled academically during their time there. Lynn Baker graduated from Yale in 1976 and went on to attend the Yale School of Drama, where he earned a Master of Fine Arts degree in 1979 before launching his professional acting career. Pinchot had an equally distinguished academic record, graduating from Yale with honors after initially planning to study fine arts, but ultimately majoring in theater studies instead. The irony of this shared educational pedigree becomes clear when you consider the characters they portrayed on Perfect Strangers. Larry Appleton was supposed to be an average guy from Wisconsin who struggled to advance his career as a photographer and often made poor decisions despite thinking he was smarter than everyone else. Balki Bartolomé, meanwhile, was portrayed as an innocent and naive sheep herder from a tiny Mediterranean island who had no formal education and constantly misunderstood American culture and language. Yet both of these seemingly simple characters were being brought to life by two highly educated actors who had studied at one of the world's top universities and received extensive training in theater and performance. This contrast between the actors' real-world intelligence and education and their characters' on-screen personas may have actually contributed to the natural chemistry and rapport that Lynn Baker and Pinchot displayed throughout the show's 8-season run, as their shared Yale background gave them a common foundation for collaboration. Fact 13. The Dance of Joy was performed one last time, off camera. The Dance of Joy was one of the most iconic elements of Perfect Strangers, a silly but endearing celebration that Balki would perform whenever something wonderful happened, and it became so popular that fans would often request to see it at tapings. When the series came to an end with its final episode in August of 1993, the show's conclusion was an emotional moment both for the cast and for the studio audience who had gathered to watch the taping. The series finale was a two-part episode called Up, Up, and Away that focused on the births of Balki and Marianne's son and Larry and Jennifer's son, bringing the show full circle to a new generation of the family. After the final scene was filmed and the episode wrapped, the cast came out to take their final bow before the studio audience in what's known as a curtain call. This moment was captured on camera and made it into the broadcast version of the finale, showing all the actors lined up on stage while Mark Lynn Baker spoke directly to the audience and thanked them by saying, "Thank you all for being with us. Good night." However, what television viewers at home didn't get to see was what happened immediately after that curtain call ended. According to reports about the taping, once the formal goodbye was complete, Bronson Pinchot and Mark Lynn Baker decided to perform the Dance of Joy together one final time, giving the live studio audience a special farewell moment that would never be broadcast. This final performance of their signature move was just for the people who were there in person that day, making it a bittersweet and intimate conclusion to 8 years of bringing joy to millions of viewers. Fact 14. Fans recreated the opening credits in Seattle. Nearly 2 decades after Perfect Strangers ended its run, the show's devoted fan base proved that their love for the series hadn't faded with time. In 2010, a group of friends in Seattle, Washington, who were huge Perfect Strangers fans, decided to undertake an ambitious creative project as a tribute to their favorite show. They set out to recreate the opening credit sequence of Perfect Strangers as accurately as possible, going through the original footage shot by shot and planning how to replicate each moment in their own version. The project was directed by someone named Corey Calhoun, who coordinated the efforts of everyone involved to make sure they captured the spirit and details of the original opening. What made this fan project even more impressive was the speed and efficiency with which they completed it. According to reports about the recreation, most of the video was filmed in just a single day, which required careful planning and coordination to hit all the locations and shots they needed to match the original sequence. The finished product was then published online, where other Perfect Strangers fans could enjoy it and appreciate the dedication that went into making it. The recreation allowed fans to see a side-by-side comparison of the original opening credits and the Seattle version, showing just how meticulously the team had studied every detail of the source material. This kind of fan-made tribute demonstrates the lasting cultural impact that Perfect Strangers had on the people who grew up watching it, and shows how the show's cheerful theme and memorable imagery continued to resonate with audiences long after the series ended its 8-season run in 1993. Fact 15. A child actor was mysteriously dropped immediately.
3.
One of the strangest casting decisions in Perfect Strangers history happened at the beginning of Season 6, when the producers attempted to add a child character to the show's regular cast. The actress they chose for this role was Alice Porter, who had previously starred in ABC's short-lived sitcom Chicken Soup during the fall of the previous year. Porter was cast as a character named Tess Holland, described as a troublemaking but immensely cute little girl who lived upstairs from Larry and Balki in their apartment building. The character was introduced in the season's second episode, titled New Kid on the Block, which aired after the season premiere and showed Balki agreeing to babysit Tess, which causes chaos both at home and at the newspaper where Larry and Balki work. Everything about Porter's introduction suggested that she was going to be a permanent addition to the show. She was not only featured prominently in the episode itself, but her name was even included in the opening title sequence of that episode, which typically indicates that an actor is part of the main cast rather than just a guest star. However, despite all these signs that Tess was meant to be a regular character going forward, Allison Porter was suddenly and mysteriously dropped from the show immediately after that single appearance. She never appeared in another episode of Perfect Strangers, and the character of Tess Holland was never mentioned or referenced again for the rest of the series. No official explanation was ever given for why the producers changed their minds about adding a child to the cast, leaving fans to wonder what happened behind the scenes that caused such an abrupt change in direction after they had already committed to introducing the character.